The Colts linebackers are looking for a little respect, and while they are underrated, they do still have some things to work on. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up? Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Hello, everybody. This is Jake Arthur and Zach Hicks of HorseshoeHuddle.com. You know me as your boots on the ground resident Colts media member, and Zach is the absolute A1 chef kiss, best film guy we have got in the game right now. And today we are continuing our look at each Colts positional group, going down the depth chart, and we're getting close to the end. Today we've got the linebackers. This is a group for the Colts that has seemed to be really, really solid the entire Chris Ballard era. If there's one position group this guy knows how to scout, it's linebackers. Whether it's guys that can contribute right away or, you draft and develop them and they're ready to roll within, 3 years to become one of the better players at a certain attribute at their position or overall, the Colts have done a really good job of that. So we're going to lead off talking about the clear top dogs with Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. And then there is a bit of a clog, I guess you could say, in that second group. Like who's the Otto / Sam guy? They've got passing down guys, and then how does everybody work together to be used in this? Because it's not so black and white, Mike, Will, Sam in this defense. That's just not how they use it. So Zach, let's go ahead and talk about the guys who run the second best Colts based podcast, Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. So these guys are, I think they're unheralded. If you look at, I think it was Pro Football Focus, I don't know if they had either of these guys in the top 32 linebackers, which Speed, sure, he's kind of newer to being a full-time starter. And leading up to this, he was just known as like a really, really good run defender. But Franklin, while tackles aren't everything, he has broken the Colts franchise tackle record in consecutive seasons. And has just put up like really high numbers, has been among the top 5 tacklers the last couple of years. So those guys are looking for some respect. After the season, Zaire said that they've got their sights set on, individually they want to make the Pro Bowl, and together they want to be considered the best linebacker duo in the NFL. But they do still have some work to do. I mean, I will start out with the flowery stuff on Franklin. The last couple of years, 346 tackles, including 15 for loss, 4.5 sacks, 9 quarterback hits, 4 forced fumbles, and 12 pass breakups. But he's I don't want to say one trick pony, but the pass defense part of it is not up to par with how well he keeps things ahead of him and playing in the box. What is your take on that? I mean, I do think going into his third year as a starter, there's still room for him to grow. I mean, he's been in the league since 2018, but he should have an extra wrinkle to his game that he can kind of unveil.
Yeah, I think, starting with the flowery stuff, I mean, I think Franklin and Speed are really good run defenders, really, really good run defenders. And they both have these really high level flashes where they're reading what's in front of them. They're bursting through the line and they're making a massive stop. I mean, for Speed, it feels like every 4th and 1 and every 3rd and 1, EJ Speed is that guy who's making that play, especially if the opposing team is dumb enough to try to run the ball on 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1. I don't know why last year with the Colts run defense, as long as Grover was out there, a defensive tackle, why you would ever run, because EJ Speed's going to break through there and make a big time play. It's like throwing a bubble screen to Kenny Moore. Like, why are you doing that? What's your plan here for your opposing team? But these two players, I think they have really high level flashes in the run game. I think even at their worst in the run game, they're very good run defenders who get the job done, accumulate a lot of tackles and limit the damage when players do break through the line. I think, like you said, some of the issues and where Pro Football Focus has them ranked much lower than where we would personally have him in the indie market is when it comes to pass defense. I think to kind of defend them a little bit, this pass defensive scheme is extremely difficult for linebackers to handle. I mean, it's one where your linebackers aren't covering a 5 to 10 yard space. When under Matt Eberflus in that cover 2 zone, a lot of the linebackers, they had 2 safeties over the top. They didn't have to be as vertical in their coverage responsibilities. They weren't matching coverage as much as they are now in this scheme. So you saw a guy like Shaquille Leonard when he was at his peak, when he was in his prime. The Colts really used him as like a middle of the field type spy that could freelance a little bit and just jump routes as he saw fit. Where in this scheme, it's very much, hey, you have to be a hard charger in the run game. You have to be anticipatory in the pass game, in the play action game. You have to match routes that are going vertical next to you and behind you. You have to be so diverse and so good in the scheme to be a plus linebacker in coverage. And I think the only player we've ever really seen be dominant in that Gus Bradley scheme at the linebacker position is Bobby Wagner back in 2009, 2010, whatever it was when he was with the Legion of Boom. I know there was a couple guys with the Jaguars as well who had some good years, but for the most part, it really was just Bobby Wagner. So it's a tough task in the scheme to be a top tier coverage linebacker in the scheme, but we have seen guys do it. I mean, I think Bobby Okereke a couple years ago before he got his payday with the New York Giants was a big time coverage asset for this Colts team. And I don't know if Speed and Franklin have gotten to that level yet in coverage. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think especially Zaire Franklin has had some really good moments in coverage. He's had some really good robots. I think the Cowboys game 2 years ago in 2022 had a really good pass breakup against Dalton Schultz in the end zone. Fantastic play. And there's a lot of good moments like that on film. And I think Franklin had a pass breakup that led to a Rodney Thomas interception that year as well. Some really good moments from these guys. But overall, it's about the consistency. This scheme, it kind of begs offenses to attack over the middle, and the linebackers are going to be tested so much in terms of play action and in breakers and just reading and reacting. So the next step for these guys really is just getting more equipped to read the routes that are going on behind them, read the routes that are breaking vertical, trusting the safety over the top to sometimes you can pass some of those plays off and attack underneath and be a little bit more aggressive in coverage. I think the flashes are there for both guys, but it's really about taking that next step and just locking it down. But I wouldn't say either of these guys are bad players by any means. They're not bad players. They're not even like average players. I think they're good, solid to above average type linebackers, and they certainly can both take that next step. Yeah, I'm not down on these guys whatsoever. I know a lot of this sounded kind of negative here, but Franklin, big time leader on this team, great player for what he does, and just does a lot of good things in the run game. EJ Speed gets better every single year. I think this is a really solid duo. They don't have that superstar like a Shaquille Leonard or even what Bobby Okereke was becoming in that final year with the Colts, but they have 2 really, really solid players who can just get the job done, which is better than a lot of teams can honestly say about their linebacker group.
Yeah, I think you definitely gotta give the good with the bad there, and it's kind of an explanation as to why outside of this market, people don't, they don't have them up on this big pedestal that maybe we do, but it is different. These guys aren't necessarily stat sheet stuffers, very much guys that thrive in the box. Tackle volume and tackle for loss, but I do think they both have shown growth. I mean, Franklin, I think it was last year he dealt with he had kind of had a knee issue last year, and you kind of saw his numbers start to dwindle a little bit. And that was about the time that EJ Speed got into the starting lineup and replaced Shaquille Leonard when he got released. And then I noticed in the moment last year, I noticed EJ Speed started to really pick things up. Over the last 4 games of the season, he had 10 plus tackles in each of them, averaged almost 12 tackles per game. And again, that tackles aren't everything, but to me, when you see high tackle numbers, it is an indicator that a guy is playing more comfortable and confidently. They're trusting what they see and they can get to the ball quicker. So with Speed, he was always kind of a guy, obviously a great athlete, but was going to get more and more comfortable as he got more playing time. Neither of these guys are really someone who's going to put up the interception or even pass breakup numbers that Leonard did. But I do, particularly Speed, seems to make very interesting special plays, whether it's blowing up those screen passes or the outside runs, just killing those, especially on late downs. But also he seems to be not at Leonard's level, but he has that knack to separate guys from the ball as well. So he can force fumbles. He can make things interesting. We've seen consistent growth from both guys. Now, do they meet the mark in terms of like a true star 3-down linebacker that we knew before in Leonard next year? We'll see. But in this next segment, we're going to kind of talk about why it is not necessarily all that important, because there is another group of guys that kind of help fill the role that a whole linebacker group will need. All right, the NBA Finals are done. Obviously, football has not started up yet until near the end of July, which means the MLB is king right now. And in Indy, of course, we don't have a pro team, but we do have the Indians, which is the Pirates farm team. And if you're looking for tickets there, or if you want to go to Cincinnati for the Reds or Chicago for the Cubs or White Sox, whatever, Gametime has still got you covered. They are an authorized ticket marketplace of the MLB, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. And the prices on the Gametime app, they actually start to decrease the closer you get to game time. With their killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, they've got the views from the seat and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They've got the last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off of buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, whatever. Zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and then you let Gametime choose the seat for you. And then ticket coverage, which I think is super important. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, because life happens. You can plan on going to these things and then something comes up and then you just can't do it. For example, if I had plans tonight, my daughter was up throwing up all night last night, probably wouldn't be going. But Gametime, they've got you covered. Life happens. So again, take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
And are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Jake, now we're getting to our favorite segment of this show, and it is the Segun Olubi show. We're just only talking Segun Olubi. That's our favorite player on the entire roster because we love the bottom of the roster guys. But all jokes aside, we're talking about the depth at this linebacker spot where, it's kind of different than other positions where I don't think, like other positions, it goes tier 1, tier 2, and then unlikely to make the roster. When we're talking about that. And it's really easy for our 3-segment show that we're doing. But for this one, it's more tier 1 and then this big group of guys who were either on the roster last year or just drafted to come in here and make the roster. So we have 5 guys here. Jalen Carleys, who was just selected in the 5th round out of Missouri, former safety, converting over to the linebacker position. We have Ronnie Harrison. We have Segun Olubi, Grant Stewart, and Cam McGrone, all guys who were on the roster at some point last year. Harrison, a guy who came in, towards the end of last year and outsnapped all the other players on defense, kind of combined there once he came in. So really interesting group, Jake. How do you kind of look at this group of 5 guys and separate it, at least in your mind?
Yeah, so I think when we talked about the linebacker group coming into the offseason, we said, we like Franklin, we like speed, but they really need a guy who coverages his bag. And so the Colts went out and they drafted Jalen Carleys, who is a big safety that they're converting down to linebacker. They have a plan for him. Richard Smith loved him, linebackers coach. Cato June, assistant linebackers coach, is a guy who's made the exact same transition when he was a player, was a safety at Michigan, became a Pro Bowl will linebacker for the Colts as a player. So I think the Colts would love for history to repeat itself. One thing I do like about Carleys, already showing good things in the spring, which is something we saw from Jalen Jones last year. Carleys had an interception in one practice that we saw. And I noticed the dude is big. Like, he's not just a big safety, but he's listed on the Colts website as 6'3", 227. He's just big for a defender. He's like one of the bigger Colts linebackers too. and he's super athletic as well. So I don't know like right away what his role is going to be, how much they can get him on the field. But I certainly think when it comes to passing downs and things like that, and they need a rangier linebacker, especially if they're facing a defense or an offense that loves to space things out a little bit, he might be your guy, which kind of makes it interesting compared to Ronnie Harrison, because Harrison was your hybrid guy last year, literally played 138 snaps at linebacker and 94 at defensive back last year. So I'm interested to see how that relationship kind of plays out, if it's an either or with those guys, or if they just have two versatile utility linebackers. But then again, Segun Olubi is the next guy that I think is secure in the group. Backup Mike is very important to them. They spent all last training camp looking for a backup Mike. Olubi, I think, is the guy they trust the most. He had 115 snaps last year, and then it's kind of a free fall. Grant Stewart had 32 snaps on defense, and then Cam McGrone had 8. So while I do think they like Stewart and McGrone, particularly Stewart on special teams is just a special teams demon. McGrone is a player I think they like defensively, but have just never found a consistent role for him. So I really think Carlisle, Harrison, and Olubi are the guys I'm most comfortable with. And I'll have you explain this more in the final segment, but it's going to be all about how they use each guy to their strength, because I don't think it's just going to be so black and white. Mike, Will, Sam, Otto. It's Otto in this defense, but it's going to be interesting the way they can do these things.
Yeah. I also kind of save a lot of that conversation for the last segment, but when I'm just looking at these guys on paper, I think Carlisle or Carlys. Is it Carlisle or Carlys? How do you say his last name?
It's Carlisle. That's one I had to ask
okay.
about after they drafted him.
Perfect. Yep. Jalen Carlisle from
Yep.
Missouri. I think he's a fascinating player to add to this group, because we've seen exactly what the Colts want to do with him. We've seen it with Divine Diablo, with the Las Vegas Raiders. They've done the same thing there. They saw it with Kaiser White. This is the exact same staff who handled both of those transitions, and those players both ended up being really good NFL players at the linebacker position. So they have the past pedigree of working with players like Carlisle. They have the experiment that they did last year with Ronnie Harrison kind of worked. I mean, we look at this Colts linebacker group last year. They struggled to create turnovers and force big-time plays. Harrison really only got out there for a couple games, and in those couple games, he had an interception against the Buccaneers. He had a pick 6 against the Cincinnati Bengals, and while the Bengals one was kind of a tip ball to him, that just shows what happens when you have that more speed and awareness on the field, is that you can create those big time plays. So I think that Carlisle is going to get out there a good amount this next season. I don't know if it's going to be like a week 1 thing, but I think when we talk about this rookie class, a lot of what we've been saying is it's not a matter of if, it's more about like a matter of when. I think with Carlisle, that applies more so than a lot of these players, where it's like, if your only competition really is Ronnie Harrison, or even Speed and Franklin for a couple of the third down snaps, I do think he's going to get out there quite a bit. So he's really the X factor. He's got the long arms. He's got the athleticism. He's got the play style that they like at that position. I think he's going to get a good amount of snaps this year. And then I like what you said about Segun Olubi as well, where, all last offseason, the Colts were saying, we need to find our backup Mike. We need to find the guy who, if Zaire Franklin goes down, the guy that can wear that green dot and be that player who can step in. And we saw last year in a game where Franklin missed the Carolina Panthers game. Segun Olubi comes in, and it wasn't perfect. Like, he missed 5 or 6 tackles in the game. It wasn't perfect by any means. I know PFF got really on him, because that's their biggest thing, is if you miss tackles, you're the worst player in football. But he missed a couple tackles a game, but he had a couple really strong plays in there. He had an interception against Bryce Young as well. Did some really nice things. So I think Segun Olubi really solidified himself in that kind of outing. And then Stewart and McGrone, special teams are very important, especially with this new kickoff rules. We don't know if they keep all 7 of these guys because of the kickoff rules. Again, something we got to ask Brian Mason the next time we talk to him. But I do think it's going to be a really good, healthy competition in camp, and it's going to be more defined than what it was last year. Where last year it was throwing a bunch of young guys out there together and saying who can win these certain spots just by doing certain things in practice. Where this year it's, hey, Carlisle and Harrison are kind of competing for the same role. Olubi versus maybe McGrone for the same role, and Stewart just doing his Grant Stewart type thing. I think that's more defined going into camp this year compared to last year, where it was just trying to see where every guy fits into this defensive scheme.
Yeah, and something else I was just thinking about with Carlisle as well. I don't want to say they'll force a role because a guy always has to earn it. But they really need to get an eye on him because like all the linebackers are free agents next year.
Yeah.
In terms
Except
of
for Zaire. Yeah. Except for Zaire.
In terms of guys who actually play, Zaire is the only one that's not a free agent. And I mean, EJ Speed, I mean, you love EJ Speed, but if this kid Carlisle, who is probably a more well-rounded linebacker than Speed is in terms of potential, if he's looking good throughout the year and you give him a little more playing time, you could save millions of dollars there. I mean, I'm personally a proponent of keeping Speed around, but in the NFL, you're looking at what the next thing is. And that's something we've talked about a lot with this positional series is planning for the future. Now, if you wind up keeping multiple guys, because like Kwity Paye got his 5th-year option picked up, even though Latu got drafted, like they can keep both, but they really need to find out what they have in Carlisle, especially, again, since all their depth is going to be wiped out in free agency.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that's a big factor here. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk more about these defined roles on defense, where these guys fit in, and kind of what the competitions are going to look like come training camp time. All right, guys, we're back with our final segment today, talking about the roles on this defense, where these guys fit in, and kind of how the starting group can kind of look. So I know a lot of us have our minds warped by the Madden style. I know they've been better in recent years when it comes to Madden, but the Madden style of you have 3 starting linebackers on every single play. Every single play, you have 3 starting linebackers, 4 defensive linemen, and the 4 defensive backs, and that's your defense, where the NFL is really not a base defense anymore. It's very rare to see 3 linebackers on the field together. It's more of the non-base defense now. It's more of the specialty group where nickel has become the base, where your Kenny Moore and your slot corner is going to play pretty much the entire game, and because your slot corner is always going to be out there to combat these 3 receiver sets, or even, I mean, heck, you might combat 12 personnel with the 2 tight ends with a slot corner out there when you have a guy like Kenny Moore. So you're not going to have many opportunities to have a base defense on the field. It's more so like 10 to 15, maybe 20% of your overall snaps on the year are going to be 3 linebacker sets. So when we mention things like the Otto or the Sam linebacker role, it's kind of a dying position in a way. It's even more so dying than what it was in 2018 or 2019 under Matt Eberflus, where there were a couple more 3 linebacker sets back then. It's even gone down more so since then, but we do still see some times where teams do come out in 3 linebacker sets, and it's especially important for defenses when they combat those heavy personnels, 12 personnels, 13 personnels, to have 3 linebackers on the field that can cover and run and move with these very athletic tight ends and play action offenses. One offense in particular is the Houston Texans. They do a lot of under center play action work when they get you into those 3 linebacker sets. So you have to have guys on the field that can play. So when you look at what the Colts did last year with their 3 linebacker sets, obviously when Shaquille Leonard was still here, they would get Leonard, Speed, and Franklin all on the field. And that had some varying degrees of success for this team. I'm not going to say it was perfect. I'm not going to say it was horrible, but some varying degrees with Leonard having his, regression happening last season. But when Leonard was ultimately released and they brought Ronnie Harrison up to the roster, what the Colts did is they moved EJ Speed to that Sam or Otto type role, and then they would have Ronnie Harrison play that will linebacker role that EJ Speed would typically be deployed in the starting defense. So in those 10 to 15% of the snaps that we do see the Colts in 3 linebacker sets next year, it really is going to be either Carlisle or Harrison that comes in at that will linebacker spot, and Speed moving down to more of that Sam or Otto type role that is going to be on the line of scrimmage or more on the strong side of the offensive unit. I know a lot of people, when they think Sam or Otto, they think of this big burly linebacker and they think, oh, cool, Grant Stewart will be out there and get some defensive snaps. That's just not really how the Colts view it. Or even if you have, Saguna Luby as your 3rd linebacker, like your 3rd best linebacker on your team, it doesn't mean he's going to be your 3rd linebacker out there on 3 linebacker sets. So I would expect Carlisle or Harrison, if Harrison beats him out in camp, to be that 3rd starting linebacker on those base personnel looks. But for the most part, look, it's going to be EJ Speed at will. It's going to be Zaire Franklin at Mike. That's how the Colts are going to deploy it most of the time on defense. And then you might see some changes on 3rd down, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second too, Jake. But I just wanted to, do a quick rundown on that there, because again, I know Maddenification of our mindsets when it comes to football is, oh, 3 linebackers always have to be on the field because that's how I call my defense on Madden, or that's how the depth chart looks on Madden. When in reality, it's more so 2 linebacker sets on defense, with the third linebacker base defense being more so a rarity in today's NFL.
It's all just based on who gives you the biggest boost on Engage 8, because that's what you're running on that.
Then we're putting all safeties at linebacker is what we're actually doing on Madden.
Right. Now, so I've mentioned before, I keep my own like lineup and depth chart on there. I think what I'm going to wind up doing is labeling it like passing down linebacker, backup Mike, backup run stopper, essentially, because that's really what it comes down to. Because I mean, you're going to have that backup run stopper to EJ Speed, but then like you mentioned, it's really going to be him that's in that role when you go to 3 linebacker sets, and then Harrison, Carlisle, whoever you're going to have as you're passing down. So that is pretty interesting. Obviously, we kind of mentioned it earlier as well, but special teams, the Colts usually keep a lot of linebackers due to special teams because it's where you know, McGrone, Stewart, historically, Speed and Franklin, Matthew Adams, like that's really how they get these guys involved. I don't know how many they're going to keep. I know when I did my roster prediction, my 53 man, I went with 6. I think I booted Stewart off of there just because Carlisle's kind of made it a numbers game, but I don't know. They may decide to keep more than normal or less. I don't know how they really view this thing yet. I don't know how much Brian Mason will divulge because he's not a big chatty Cathy, but I mean, we'll see when it gets out to training camp time.
Something I'll say is I think the easiest player to cut and stash on the practice squad would be a Ronnie Harrison, though, because the rest of the league knows who he is at this point. The Colts probably value Harrison more so than any other team in the league does. I mean, he was signed back to essentially, and it wasn't the vet minimum, but it was pretty close to the vet minimum this offseason. So you could easily see, like, if Carlisle is ready to go from day one and get out there on defense, you could put Harrison on the practice squad and have him be your Carlisle's insurance plan, you know, behind him, especially if you think McGrone and Stewart are better on special teams. So I think that's going to be something to watch right there. I think my money would be on McGrone being the odd man out right now, but he's still a really young and athletic linebacker. It's hard to cut guys with his traits and intangibles. But one thing I did want to mention that the Colts were severely missing last season, and it kind of influenced their defensive coverage quite a bit, was when it comes to third downs, the Colts love to run what is called cover 3 Mabel. And essentially with cover 3 Mabel, on the backside of the defense of the cover 3 call, you'll have your press corner in straight up man-to-man coverage, and your will linebacker, your weak side linebacker, will be in man coverage with the running back or the tight end, whoever is on that backside of the formation. And then on the other side, with more of the 3 wide receivers of 3 threat side, is when you're doing kind of zoning and the zone matching with the safety over the top and kind of boxing that out like a quarters type of design. But that backside is so valuable because you need a corner who can win in press coverage, which they don't have Stephon Gilmore anymore like they did 2 years ago, but they have Juju Brents, who was really good in that type of role last year. But they don't have that linebacker that they had in Bobby Okereke 2 years ago either, who could just lock down a running back or lock down a tight end, or whoever that's going to be in man coverage. I hope EJ Speed can step up and be that guy this year. But if he's not, I mean, that's where a guy like Jalen Carlisle is so important for this defense, where if Carlisle can come in and play on third downs and be that man who can just lock it down in man coverage, it opens up the Colts to go back to something that really worked in 2022, especially in the first half of 2022 when that defense was really good for the Colts. I mean, I would argue that the first half of 2022, when the Colts were kind of competitive, was one of the best stretches of Gus Bradley defense we have seen since his Legion of Boom days. I mean, the Colts defense was top 10-ish in a lot of categories, with an offense on the other side of the field for themselves that was just downright putrid. And they were winning games against the Chiefs and winning games against other teams with a really good defensive performance. So I think if they can get that, if they can get one of these linebackers to step up and be strong enough to perform well in those sparse, man coverage opportunities that you get in the cover 3s and cover 3 Mabels, I think that'll be a massive upgrade to this defense. So who in camp is going to prove to be the guy who can lock it down in man coverage, who can run with the running backs, who can run with the tight ends on the backside? I think that's going to be a massive thing to watch for in training camp. It's going to be a massive thing to watch during the season next year to see how good this defense really can be in pass coverage.
Yeah, I smell a conversation coming with maybe Richard Smith or Gus on like how much do you guys really miss Bobby Okereke in that role? Because I think it's significant. I mean, it's honestly one of the biggest what ifs, or just unfortunate turns of events for the Colts, because they obviously couldn't pay him with what they were paying Leonard, and then we know how that all went. But just that role that Okereke was able to fill that they haven't replaced yet. Obviously, it's just been a year, but what he was able to do, it's huge for that defense. So we'll see if Carlisle is the guy that can kind of step up into that eventually.
It's kind of like the linebacker group's kind of like a lesser version of the defensive line, where the defensive line, I think, is playing at a higher level with the guys that they have and the pieces they have. But overall, with the linebacker group, they have the pieces to make a really good core there at linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of the elements that can make good. I mean, Franklin, a great mic, communicates really well, good thumper in the run game, good run and chase player with some flashes in the passing game. EJ Speed makes some big level plays, and he's not like horrible in any department whatsoever. And the flashes are just high level for him. And then you have these other guys who could step up and serve in good roles. You don't have that elite player. Like I said about the defensive line, you don't have your Nick Bosa or your Joey Bosa or any of those guys. At linebacker, you don't have Shaquille Leonard. You don't have Bobby Wagner. But it doesn't need to be that for you to find success in the NFL. You have guys who can be quality players in the scheme and do some good things for you. So it's all about them all taking this next step, or a couple guys taking that next step to really fulfill what this scheme needs out of the linebacker group. They certainly have the guys on paper, the guys who can fill the roles. It's about it all coming to fruition this next season with hopefully improved defensive line play in front of them. Well, that's all we have for today, guys. I do want to let you know before we get out of here that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available in the free Fire TV channels app. If you guys don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to us on YouTube where we list your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.